Hey there, listeners. I am Joanne Lee Cornish, your truth bomb dropper in the world of weight loss, body composition, and mastering the art of rocking the body you've always deserved and dreamed of in midlife and beyond. Let's cut through the noise. Society tells us it's downhill from now on. We're told to embrace the middle-aged weight gain, embrace the muscle loss and poor health. If that's your vibe, then cool. But if you're ready to defy the narrative, then I am your gal. This podcast is a no fluff podcast where we break down the essential truths of body composition, toss around some practical tips, and dissect the latest trends. I'm not here to sugarcoat. I'm here to show you what's not just possible, but downright probable for you. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to click the link in the show notes to explore how we can team up and kick mediocrity to the curb. I offer one-on-one coaching, my ever-popular group coaching programs, and my corporate Educate to Elevate program. Okay, let's get on with the podcast. Enjoy. Hey guys, let's do this again. So if you're listening to my podcast, Midlife Mayhem, welcome. I'm also filming this for my YouTube channel. If you're listening to the podcast and you want to watch me, then hop over to YouTube, Joanne Lee Cornish. That's it, just Joannelee Cornish. And that is my YouTube channel, and you can watch me in all my glory. Although today it's not very glorious, it's sweats and scruffy hair. That's just what's happening this Saturday. And if you're watching me on YouTube, thank you. But please also jump over to my podcast, Midlife Mayhem, on all platforms, because I don't always do the video. In fact, this is only the second time that I've done, with video. Because usually when I record my podcast, I'm in my pajamas with a bun on my head, and nobody needs to see that. So yesterday I did an Instagram live with a very good friend of mine, Monica Brandt, and we touched on something and it just got me thinking, and I want to expand on that. So when we're talking a bit about midlife, a lot of people are confused, they're a little bit frustrated, and that's because of the lack of or the abundance of information out there. So it's either the lack of information, coming from people we respect, like our doctors and health professionals, or an abundance of information from like ChatGPT or YouTube and people spewing information at us, but we don't really understand it. And I want to touch on that, and I want to touch on two main things that happened, or that I see. One of the main things that happened was the WHI, so the Women's Health Initiative, which was a study done in the 1990s. And what happened there was it was such a flawed study. And unfortunately, it was such a flawed study that it is shaped the conversation incorrectly that's coming from a lot of health professionals. So I want to talk about that because, we should be able to go to our health professionals and get great information. And that was a real stumbling block. That one study just ruined the course of information for ladies in midlife. So I want to talk about that today. And I also want to talk about the use of birth control as a form of hormone replacement therapy. And I want to say how that also is a flawed approach. Now, I know a lot of women do this. A lot of women are prescribed in midlife, birth control to relieve them of the symptoms of perimenopause. And, it works. Someone will like, I feel great. I've never had hot flashes. I feel fantastic. No problem. This works for me. But it is not without concern. So I want to talk about that. And again, this is all going to be covered expanded on in my Mastering Midlife program, which starts next Sunday. So, if you like this, gosh, please jump into the program. I only run it once a year. Cannot stress that enough. Link is midlifemonth.com. Anyways, let's get on with the information. So there was a study done, the Women's Health Initiative. It was done in 1991, and it ran till about 2000, and it cost nearly $1 billion, and there was 160,000 women in that study. And what it was meant to do, it was meant it was meant to test whether hormone replacement therapy was, whether it was dangerous, whether it had any things like heart disease, fractures, cancers, things like this. Well, they started off at a pretty funky place because this was meant to test you know people, the ladies that were symptomatic of perimenopause. But what actually happened was they used ladies, and the average age of the ladies used, remember, 160,000 ladies, was 63. I mean, they used ladies up into the 70s. So the vast majority of the ladies in this study were not premenopausal, they were postmenopausal. So right off, you have a problem there that the average age of the women that were using the hormone therapy on was 63. So many were a decade more older than ladies actually dealing with perimenopause. So the demographic was of the participants was not reflective of general midlife female population. And also, a large portion of the people in the study were overweight. They already had risk factors. Sorry, some of them had smoking histories. A lot of them had high blood pressure. So there just was it wasn't a good demographic to use. So I don't even know how we could spend $1 billion on a study where whatever information was going to come out, it wasn't really going to be relative to the population we were meant to be studying. Yeah. So then what happened? So then what they also did with this study, like I say, it was years long. It cost a fortune. And what were they using? Well, the hormones they were studying, they were using Premarin. So Premarin is a conjugated equine estrogen. So it comes from horse pee. So I've got a multitude of issues with this. For one, that a horse has 16 different types of estrogen. Women have three, so that might be a problem. I also have a real problem with how those horses are trapped. I know a lot of them are in Canada, and they keep them pregnant to get their urine, and then they just send them to slaughter. So I have a huge problem with that. So they're using Premarin, which is equine estrogen, and they were using Prevera, which is a synthetic form of progesterone. Now, this combination was common in the 1990s, but now we know that this Prevera, which is the synthetic progesterone, behaves very differently in the body than a bioidentical progesterone, and it can increase clotting risk. It has a different effect on breast tissue, and it doesn't offer the same calming benefits on the brain or for sleep that the bioidentical progesterone that is more commonly used now does. So today's practitioners, they prefer estradiol, which is the body's natural estrogen, delivered transdermally. So I wear a patch, other people use a cream. And today it's more paired with micronized progesterone, a much safer, gentle approach. And that this study, the Women's Health Initiative, did not study either of these. So again, to use the information gone from this study isn't even related to the forms of HRT we take today. What happened with that study? It was massive. The result was massive. The study was actually stopped. So what were the big headlines in about, I'm going to say it was 2002. The headlines were HRT increases the risk of breast cancer. HRT increases the risk of heart rate and stroke. And there's a problem there as well. So they were the headlines that went out. All the women just dropped their HRT. They stopped. The doctors were terrified. Doctors stopped prescribing it, stopped even talking about it. And that is a situation that still goes on today. You'll still have doctors that were either, around, and, it wasn't that long ago, generation ago, and are terrified, or you had a whole generation of doctors who weren't educated in HRT because of the results of this study. And so, still today, you'll find a lot of health practitioners who are very reluctant to guide women when this conversation of HRT comes up. So another thing that happened there, and where did these headlines come from? So to understand what happened with the headlines, you have to understand how results were interpreted. So for example, let's talk about the breast cancer. The headline that went out was HRT increases the risk of breast cancer by 26%. That's terrifying. If I'm taking something there's 26% chance that I'm going to get, I'm not going to take it. So you can see why the ladies were terrified, the doctors were terrified. But now we have to understand, for a headline like that, we have to understand the difference between relative risk and absolute risk. So I'm hoping this example makes sense. So going on the results of this study, the results were 3 ladies per 1,000 had a higher risk of breast cancer. Okay, 3. And it went up to, with the study, the risk, so that was just a standard risk for the ladies, 3 out of 1,000 had a higher risk of breast cancer. With the results of the study, it was, and remember, these ladies were average age of 63, some were smokers, a lot were obese, had high blood pressure. The result went to 3.8 women in 1,000 had a higher risk for breast cancer. So it went from 3 in 1,000 to 3.8 in 1,000. So if you take 3 and an increase to 3.8, that increase is 26%. And that's what you call a relative risk. So the number 3 that increases to 3.8, that is an increase on the actual number of 26%. That is the relative risk. You see where I'm going? The actual risk, the actual risk was not even 1 lady in 1,000. It went from 3 ladies in 1,000 to 3.8 ladies in 1,000. So that's not the same thing at all. So this is where the difference between this is the difference between relative risk and absolute risk. So the absolute risk was 3 ladies in 1,000 to 3.8 ladies in 1,000. The relative risk was 26%. And that's what the media went with. You see how that's very disconcerting, and it gives a completely skewed result. I think you can agree that if you were told there's a 26% increase in risk, you might be scared. But if it was like, hey, there's maybe less than 1 person in 1,000 increased risk, you might be like, okay, completely different thing. So hugely flawed studies. The results were greatly misconstrued, and the media ran with it. And as soon as the media ran with that, women stopped their HRT, doctors stopped prescribing it, doctors stopped talking about it, and that is still going on today. We have not got past that. So you have the ladies that were not a true demographic. We were studying forms of HRT that are not really widely used, and they're still used, but not widely used anymore. I mean, that synthetic progesterone is still used in birth control. The estrogen, now we use a transdermal. We don't take oral estrogen anymore. It passes through the liver. It's always transdermal. So everything has changed, and yet the lack of information really continues, and it stems from this terrifying, very expensive 160,000 women in that study, $1 billion, and they used ridiculous demographic and got a ridiculous result, and still the terror from that study remains. So if you do have a health practitioner that's um, reluctant to talk to you about HRT, don't make them right or wrong. Just move on and find somebody that's actually willing to have the conversation, and maybe is separated themselves from that era of misguided, um, from the misguided study. Yeah. So also, what still goes on is the use of, let me just summarize that. So why was the Women's Health Initiative flawed? The women that studied were older than the typical premenopausal woman by decades. The drugs were outdated formulations that we rarely use anymore. And the results that were presented were they were shouting about relative risks, not absolute risks. So it's very, very scared. And yet it became very, very scary. But that also became the gold standard, and doctors were terrified. Prescriptions plummeted, and a lot of women suffered. And we're over 2 decades later, and we still have not undone the damage of that study. I took a lot of information and made that into just a few minutes. I expand on it more in the midlife program. Moving on, the birth control thing. So I've had many ladies come to me and they're using birth control very successfully for their form of HRT. Um, Women that were symptomatic, and they've gone to the doctors, and the doctors are like, oh, we'll just put you back on birth control. And maybe they were used to birth control, so they're like, oh, that was fine. It worked for me before. It works with me again. The symptoms go away and they're just hunky dory, and they're like, this is fantastic. Birth control is not the same as HRT. So let's shift gears again a little bit and talk about something that is happening today, and it's happening a lot, especially with ladies in their 40s and 50s. So they've been being prescribed birth control for hormone therapy. So the pill contains synthetic estrogens and progesterones. So it was designed as a contraceptive, not for replacing declining hormones in midlife. Very different. So here are the concerns. So a birth control is suppressing the natural hormone production rather than replacing what is missing. Let me say that again because it's a big deal. The birth control suppresses natural hormone production rather than replacing the natural hormonal decline. Birth control, it lowers testosterone dramatically, and that is a big, big thing, right? So if you crush a lady's testosterone, that's going to impact their energy, their mood, the libido, their muscle tone. I mean, it's a big deal. It also carries higher risks of blood clots and stroke, especially in ladies over 35 who smoke, ladies that are overweight, ladies that have metabolic issues, which a lot of ladies in midlife have metabolic issues. So why do the doctors prescribe it? Well, familiarity. The doctors are trained to prescribe the pill. So they're like, hey, they're not necessarily trained to prescribe HRT, so they're kind of comfortable with it. Insurance coverage, pills are cheap and often covered. Um, it can, birth control can regulate bleeding and help with hot flashes. And also some ladies still need the contraceptive side of it. So it's a practical 2 for 1 for many ladies. But it's not optimal. So let's talk a little bit more about the testosterone thing. Well, what is happening there with the birth control? It is, it's suppressing the production of hormones from your ovaries. Well, in your younger years, the production of testosterone, 50% of that comes from your ovaries. So if you're going to crush your ovaries, which are already getting crushed because we're in midlife, so your ovarian function is already declining. But if we're going to crush that, then that's where 50% of our testosterone is actually made. And testosterone is going down, and now you've just crushed the production that's being made from the ovaries. That is not ideal. What happens in midlife is our hormones are being made from our ovaries. Guys, your hormones are being made from your testes. And then as we get older, the ovaries decline and the production and the adrenals take over the production of the hormones. Yeah. So adrenals, usually we're making about 15% of our hormones, but as the ovaries decline, the adrenals have to take up the slack and make the hormones for us. Well, if you're going to take a birth control and just shut the ovaries down, you kind of got rid of that last remaining, you know, production of testosterone, and now you're relying completely on the adrenals. So yeah, it lowers testosterone dramatically. Well, if you're lowering testosterone maybe in a younger lady, I still don't think it's a good idea. But if you're going to lower testosterone in a midlife lady, and a lot of the issues that women deal with in midlife are linked to testosterone, motivation, energy, mood, muscle tone, sex drive, and you're going to crush that, I'm not sure many women would want that if they understood what birth control did. Also, the higher the risk of blood clots. So this is it's oral, birth control, you're taking a pill, and that has got an increased rate of blood clots, especially if you're over the age of 35. When we're taking bioidentical HRT, the progesterone might be oral, but the estrogen and never is, and the testosterone isn't. And we usually have transdermal creams, gels, and patches. So, the increased risk of blood clots and stroke by using birth control as a form of HRT. So what does it actually do? So yes, the ladies taking birth control, they might feel they're familiar with it, they're used to doing it, they found the one that works for them, so they continue doing it. And I've heard this over again. I never had a hot flash. Feel fine. I'm doing great. And that's a tough argument to get somebody to switch over. Well, it's working for you from a symptomatic point of view, but your risk of blood clot stroke have greatly increased and your testosterone is being crushed, which, when you first enter perimenopause, you might not think that's a big deal, but I'm telling you, when you get into your early 50s, you realize it's a big deal. When all of a sudden your muscle tone's not the same, that skin's not the same, your sex drive's not the same, you're working real hard, you're not getting the same results. It's a big deal. So again, this is a grey sweatshirt, pretty dirty one at that. It's not a white coat, no medical background. And my goal here is just to give you the information to start an educated conversation with your healthcare professional, and to stress that if they're not willing to have this conversation, if they're reluctant to expand on this conversation into what is used more frequently now, what a lot of people are having success with bioidentical hormones, then I would suggest that we take the conversation elsewhere. And we do that without making our doctors right or wrong. You know, I don't like when the doctors are getting beat up all the time. I don't like that. They studied for a long time. They got themselves in massive debt to be health professionals. But when we're asking them to be specialists, don't expect them to be specialists in everything. If you've got a great doctor and they work great for you for your general health, but this conversation's a little awkward and it feels a little clunky, then keep them and go and talk to a specialist that this is what they do. This is where their experience lies. I do not like it when we just point the finger and say the doctors don't know anything. They don't. Of course they do. But use the right tool for the job. So if your doctor's not the right tool for the job, go work with another doctor that specializes this, that is the right tool for the job. Um, the information out there can be spotty. It can be limited. It can be sporadic. So you get little bits of information here and a little bit of information here, and you can't actually put it into a understandable, usable, strategic plan. And that just leads to more confusion. I hope this helped. If you are still scared of HRT or the conversation, I'm hoping this helped in knowing that why the information and why the doctors can be so guarded because of this really, really flawed, very expensive study. How that even got passed, I don't know. Uh, and also the use of birth control, which is still very, very popular as a treatment for HRT. Just know we're treating two different things here with HRT and birth control. The dosages of the hormones used in birth control are much higher than HRT. And again, birth control is to suppress hormonal production in a very fertile lady. HRT is to replenish hormones that are declining with age. Very, very different. Use the right tool for the job. Okay. My Mastering Midlife program. I'm not going to be promoting this much longer because it only comes around once a year. And once I start on Sunday, next Sunday, the 21st, I won't have to plug it anymore. So, but it is the last chance to jump in. Midlifemonth.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, if you enjoyed watching me in all my glory on YouTube, then I would love you to come and join the program. My groups are fabulous. They're not huge. You won't be one person out of 1,000 on the screen. We will get to know each other. I will know you by name. I will be contacting you. We will be talking. You will be supported. You will be inspired. And you'll at last have a strategy to deal with midlife and beyond. And it's not just a chick program. The guys are in there too, because you guys have your own journey. Midlife mayhem is not just the mayhem for ladies. It's the guys as well. And you guys go through andropause. And you have the same increased health risks. Hormonally, it's a different journey, but it's still a challenging one. And you guys are really overlooked. I've had many couples actually do my Mastering Midlife program. And one couple, the guy actually contacted me later and he said, Joanne, I was dragged into this program. My wife dragged me in. Didn't really want to come in, did it for her. But that program did more for our marriage than 2 years of therapy. That's what he told me. So what I get from that, huge compliment. But what I get from that and what I know about that is what happens there is the journey that the lady's going through is happening to her from like her mid 40s. By that time she gets getting into her 50s, she's kind of got through the massive symptoms, but still the challenges of body composition and health and energy and things like that. But she's got over the main crazy period of perimenopause. So she's just got through it. Her husband, or the partner, or brother, or friend, or co-worker has been watching this chaos unfold with the person that they care for. They can't really help. They're probably the whipping post to a large extent. They don't really understand what's going on. Then just as the lady's kind of finding her feet again, the guy starts going into andropause. So andropause for men starts creeping up in their 50s. And it's steady and it's subtle, and we blame age for it, and it's often ignored. But what's also happening is the guy is starting to have a tough time. But the lady's just got through her tough time, and she's like, "Oh, speak to the hand. I just haven't even got time for this. I'm at last. I'm feeling a little bit better." But her partner, husband, brother, co-worker, friend is starting to struggle. So the timing between the men and women is difficult. If we can at least all understand what the other is going through, truly understand what they're going through. I don't just mean, oh, poor you. I mean, like hormonally, what is happening? What changes are occurring? Then with that comes understanding, right? And with understanding comes patience and compassion and, just being able to support each other. So, long way of saying my programs are not just chick programs, they're for the guys as well. All right. All right, that is it for now. It is September the 13th. The program starts on the 21st on a Sunday. midlifemonth.com. But other than that, I will continue with this, I hope, fascinating information. And I hope that helped you to understand the history of HRT and why it got so crazy, scary for the ladies, but also the use of very common use of birth control as a method of HRT, how that too is very, very flawed and honestly quite concerning. I do hope you enjoyed this episode of Midlife Mayhem. Be sure to subscribe and be sure to tell your friends about this wonderful podcast. If you would like more of me, then on social, it's simple, just my name at Joanne Lee Cornish. Also my website, theshrinkshop.com, where you can see all my coaching programs. There are many, many ways we can work together. Obviously, I do private one-on-one coaching. I do all my programs are in a self-study form, and all my programs are run as a live program at least once a year. I try and do twice, but it usually ends up being once. I have mindset program. I have my awesome 5-day peak week shred that people love. I have the signature weight loss program. I have Tight 28, which is advanced weight loss. I have muscle mastery, and I have mastering midlife. So 6 programs that offer a progression to fully understand the body composition through the ages. If you have questions, if you're kind of wondering how I can help you, then simply shoot me an email at jo@theshrinkshop.com. Tell me what's going on and I'll get back to you and let you know the way I can help. Okay, that's it for now.